Yeah, like I said earlier, we got a lot to talk about. So before we do, I would like for you guys to please just like introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about who you are and ASA. So Mike, if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me on, Aaron. Appreciate it. Appreciate all y'all do. So I'm Mike Lenoard. I'm Vice President of Government Affairs for the American Sportfishing Association. We're the trade association for the sport fishing industry. We're here at ICAST, the world's largest fishing tackle trade show. That's one of the things we do. The other big thing we do is government affairs. So look out for the interests of the sport fishing industry and really the whole recreational fishing community, making sure there's access, healthy fish populations, industry can thrive if anglers can get on the water and catch fish. So we're there to support policies that do that. And
thankfully we have somebody like you guys, or else we would be in a very controversial mess, which we kind of already are, but you guys are actually fixing it.
Trying
to. We're engaged.
So, yeah, Martha, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Martha Guyas. I am the Southeast Fisheries Policy Director for ASA. I'm based in Florida, in Tallahassee. And my range is really like Carolinas to Texas, lots of issues. The Southeast is really the heart of recreational fishing.
Yeah.
So it's never a dull moment.
No, like I said, a lot going on.
Yeah.
And Mike?
Yeah, so Mike Waine, I'm the Atlantic Fisheries Policy Director for ASA, and so I pick up where Martha leaves off. I cover the Carolinas all the way through Maine, so Northeast and Mid-Atlantic are my regions, and all the fishery policy topics in that area I cover for the association.
In my opinion, because that's where I'm from, is probably the most controversial. And maybe we could start there. Everybody asks right now, and it got a lot of people heated, and we're going to go right into it, is flounder, man. Like, I'm this is all being updated to me. I hear a lot, people complain a lot. To be quite honest with you, there's a lot of different sides to choose from, but I'd love to hear what you think is appropriate right now.
Yeah, so it was kind of expected that they would close the season simply on the basis that they're using outdated information that isn't tracking with what currently is in the water. So what I mean when I say that is we use stock assessments to understand the population of the fisheries, and that information for North Carolina southern flounder is currently the most current is 2017. So here we are in 2024 using a stock assessment for 2017. So there's just a mismatch in terms of the information being used to make decisions today. And so we saw that coming because the regulations kept getting tighter. The season was getting shorter. We're trying to meet these conservation goals. But in order to do all that, you've got to have updated information to get a better understanding of where is the fishery relative to those goals, what kind of fishing access can we have while reaching those. And like I said, there's just such a mismatch between information they have to set what the season is and where we are currently in terms of the population dynamics of flounder in the water. So that they're about to come out with an updated assessment, and the terminal year for that assessment is 2022. So again, we will still have a time gap between assessment and what management gets formed on that. And so we were telling them, hey, this is coming. Like, you need to make sure you're matching your scientific information to meet your management expectations and goals. And that just has fallen short. I think that the state has trouble retaining the stock assessment scientists, like the actual employees to do that work. And then also gathering the data to conduct that assessment is also time consuming as well. But the biggest issue is this disconnect between information, scientific information, and how managers use that to set different management seasons.
Who's managing all this information? Who's collecting it? Is it NOAA?
So some of the recreational information is collected by both NOAA and the states in a partnership in our area.
Yeah.
In some other regions it's different, but for the Mid-Atlantic and New England regions, and specifically in North Carolina, they work together to implement what's called the Marine Recreational Information Program, which is the program that is used to estimate recreational catch.
Yeah.
So, and then the state collects the commercial trip ticket data. So that's what the commercial sector is catching. And then they also do various surveys to get an understanding of like tracking abundance from year to year. And so all those data streams go into that stock assessment I was saying. And that is currently managed by North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries for North Carolina Southern Flounder. And it varies based on the species and the breakdown.
For those that are listening, because not everybody knows specifically, but why is North Carolina the main focus here? Because out of all the states in the East Coast, for some reason, we lack the numbers and the data, I'm assuming.
So for Southern Flounder specifically, the fishery is concentrated in North Carolina, even though the management range is from North Carolina to Florida. So there's been some talk like, should we be managing this regionally instead of like the state of North Carolina doing X and South Carolina doing Y? Like there needs to be better coordination because we're fishing on the same resource. Those fish move from state to state. And I'm sure you've heard comments like, oh, I'm just going to go to South Carolina.
100%.
And so
Drew, he's from or was living down there and doing a lot of filming.
And so like, if you can imagine like our stock assessments from 2017 kind of moving towards like this more progressive regional management approach is equally as slow. But I do think that would be incredibly beneficial because it would first of all, it would coordinate the states on management so that, North Carolina isn't conserving the resource that South Carolina can catch without those same conservation measures. But I think collectively, the states could come together and make better management decisions for the resource if they were able to manage it regionally. And I think it will end up there. It's just really slow to come. Yeah, really slow to change.
One more controversial thing that we talk about a lot with a lot of locals is the gill netting, and if that has a huge impact or not, or why is it still legal? Is it a cultural thing? Like, what is your view on gill nets and that? Yeah,
so it's become like a really controversial topic in North Carolina. As you know, it's very polarizing. Where I think philosophically, we want user groups to be able to access the resource, assuming it can sustainably handle that. Specific gear types that are not selective, meaning they catch everything that swims into them, creates bycatch, creates challenges that I think need to be addressed. But yeah, generally speaking, ideally we're building the population to a level that allows access for all user groups. It's just the gill nets in North Carolina have become a real pain point given where the resource is. And questions arise like, is all the data there? And that's where some of the data change conversations have occurred on the commercial side too, to make sure that we're getting the best information into that process to make informed decisions.
Yeah, the gill netting, and like I said, I'm pretty sure it's a cultural thing too. I mean, it's been going on for years, and they have all these spot and croaker festivals. And,
there's a lot of commercial fishing history in the state of North Carolina.
Yeah,
a lot.
And the bycatch. I'm not a commercial fisherman, but I'm just taught from other people telling me like it had a huge impact on cobia too, potentially, and everything in between. I'm always shocked that it's still there in the state. I don't know. It's banned everywhere else, right?
Yeah, the commercial industry has gotten itself very well entrenched in the North Carolina government system, in general, to where, it is very tough. Because you're right. You got coastal communities, livelihoods, jobs that have depended on this from generation to generation. So it's really tough to, look those folks in the face and say, we're not going to allow you to do this anymore. But to your point, you look at other states and other regions that have phased out some of these destructive practices and seen the benefits that have come to the habitat and all the fisheries that are associated with it. It is difficult to justify some of this stuff continuing, but status quo is hard to break from.
On a recreational, I do a lot of diving. And, I spearfish a lot, and it is insane to see the numbers of flounder. Like, they're there, it's definitely, maybe it has helped, but it's like, okay, guys, we're catching these nonstop on rod and reel, and they're there. We can see them, and red snapper too. And do you work with red snapper a lot?
I sure do.
Infamous red snapper.
So, I mean, and one more question before we move on to that. How do you guys feel about gigging? I know it's illegal up in the Northeast, like in New Jersey and there, but like, I don't know. It's very sporty by us, and I think it's in South Carolina too. Is it legal in Florida?
Yep.
It is, yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean,
for flounder, not for everything.
Yeah,
of course.
for flounder. So that I've always controversial. Like I've done it before. It's fun, but I've seen you get a lot of small flounder, and they look much bigger from the surface.
Yeah, there's distortion. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think again, if you're following the regs and spearing fish that are of legal size, that's a practice that we would support. So it's a unique fishing technique, though.
Yeah,
and I think
for
that's
people
what
that don't know, gigging is
maybe
like
explain it a little.
Gigging's where you usually take a flash boat like a John boat or whatever and shine a big bright light, about a foot or two of water, and you take a spear or like you call it a gig and just stick it. It's big. Commercial fishermen do it all the time. I mean, it's huge. You can get it. You can crush it doing that. It's a lot of fun. I've done it, but I've also seen you don't realize if you don't know what you're doing, these kids are out there just and sometimes they don't kill them. They'll hit them in the middle and they break off and eventually die.
Yeah, it's sort of like we've talked about bow fishing, and it's kind of a gray area.
I never thought about that.
Is it fishing or is it hunting, or what would you call that? Because catch and release with those types of gears
it's becoming a huge
problematic.
Dude, it's becoming a huge sport.
Yeah,
I see guys all the time go like this off the bridge and hit sheep's head. It looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah. But again, is that hunting? Is it fishing? I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Has that ever been brought up?
In the policy area?
Yeah.
The only thing I can think of when it came up was, and this is going to get into some of the nerdy policy stuff we deal with. So there is a excise tax on fishing equipment. It goes into what's called the Sport Fish Restoration Fund. Most of that money goes back to state fish and wildlife agencies to manage fisheries, build boat ramps, hatcheries, all that stuff. So fishing equipment purchases ultimately result in money going towards conservation. A few years ago, there was a state, I won't mention, that was using some of those funds to study bow fishing. I think it was like gar, something in the Midwest. And again, it brought about this question of is that fishing?
Yeah.
And the gear that you're using to do that activity is not the same gear that's paying into this.
Is it
trust
safe?
fund? Anyway, there was just a lot of existential questions about what is this? Is this fishing? If you're buying archery equipment, that goes into a separate wildlife fund. So use their money to pay for, this is money that should be going to boat ramps and sport fish stuff. So anyway, like I said, it's a gray area that, the more you dig into fisheries policy, the more confusing.
Well, now that we're talking about that, we'll talk about my favorite hobby, spearfishing. That's becoming massive too. Yeah. I love it. I think it's the most sustainable way to hunt fish because you can clearly get an eye on what size you're shooting. Especially hogfish. We only really shoot the males. That's just the way I've always been doing it with our friends. And you don't really need to go all out. We shoot we shoot a lot of African pompano there, and when me and the guys get two, we're done. We call it a day. And you can get your limit fast,
and you can be selective.
Be very selective. Yeah.
I was size close the loop. That's a very selective gear type.
Yeah.
As opposed to the gill nets we talked about, not a selective gear type.
Yeah.
So that's where you get more towards sustainability if you can be selective.
I love it. I do a lot of free diving. Our scuba, they do a lot of commercial diving down by us. It's huge industry, and there's nothing wrong with it. I really wish North Carolina, and not just North Carolina, a lot of places protected a certain species, focused more versus, so the red snapper, for example, when I dive and all the commercial divers, you can talk to them, it's all we see.
Right.
All we see. And gags too. I see a lot of gags.
That's good.
Very good. Yeah. And they're all proper size. Hogfish, I hardly see hogfish anymore. When we do, they're usually 18, 20 pounds.
Yeah, I was saying Carolinas, they're always big, right?
Huge.
Yeah.
I just shot one that was 22 pounds. I was stoked.
Sweet.
World record, I think, is there at a right, so it was 24 pounds. But yeah, I don't know. Me and the guys always talk about it man, there's there's all these snapper mangroves and all this, and cobia, we don't really see cobia as much anymore. But I don't know, what's up with red snapper?
We
only have one day.
Yeah,
Wait,
right.
is the whole East Coast only had one day except Florida?
Florida had one day also. So this is federal waters, of course.
Yeah.
In state waters, states can do different things.
That's right.
But in general, in the Atlantic, you only get 3 miles. There's just not really fish in state waters. So the Gulf is a different thing. But really from the Keys up, it was one day. That was July 12th.
Wow.
How was the weather? Probably nobody could go.
Interesting.
It was windy.
It was
So-
pretty cruddy in the Carolinas, apparently.
Yep.
Hearing a lot of disappointment that people were not able to go out. Hearing some boats went out of Georgia, and Florida was wild. Lots of people. Yeah. It was good in Florida. So
Of course it was.
yeah. So that's always a sticking point of contention when not everybody gets access, especially when it's a one-day season.
Yeah.
Yeah. So nobody's particularly happy. Lots of angry folks for good reason. I mean, so we have undisputedly more red snapper now than anyone has seen in their lifetime.
100%. I will
Even
agree.
like, yeah, science is showing this, but the access just gets shorter and shorter and shorter. You know, really the rationale at this point is that because red snapper is closed for most of the year, people are catching them and they have to throw them back. And the thinking is that so many people are throwing back so many red snapper that the portion of those that don't survive is big enough that they've got to take that off the top before they have set quota for what the season can be. It's pretty rough. It's kind of insult to injury for a lot of people.
How many don't? I mean, I don't really bottom fish that much for red, but how many don't survive? I mean, is there like a study on that?
There's a couple of them out there, and so it depends on the depth. It depends on if you're using a descending device, which you are supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
You have to carry one if you're fishing in the South Atlantic.
Okay.
What's the discard mortality estimate they use?
It's I think 25% for recreational,
Okay.
but it does depend on a lot of things, like how hot is the water, how deep are you fishing,
how
how you
deep.
handling that fish when it comes up.
Yeah.
You know.
But there is like this deeper confusion there of, all right, you guys get this small quota because there's not enough red snapper out there. And yet there's so many red snapper out there that you keep catching them and discarding them.
Yeah.
And you can
they're
clear
going-
as day tell they're dead. Sometimes.
But it's like, well, maybe there's so many red snapper that our quota should be bigger. And maybe we should be able to keep more of these. And we should have more of a season than one day. And we wouldn't be discarding so many of them. That there's just something like off.
Yeah.
Deeply off with how this fishery is being managed.
Yeah.
Do you see any change coming?
Slowly, but yes. So NOAA had some money available that they put out a call for proposals. Florida put in a request for 3 what's called exempted fishing permits. Basically what they're going to do, they were awarded money for 3 projects where they're going to set up some lottery systems basically where anglers can go out, and if they follow the parameters that FWC gives them, then they're going to be able to keep red snapper out of season, and they're going to be able to keep other snapper grouper out of season as well. But they have to provide information. They'll have limits they have to follow. I think they're going to have to report on an app.
Yeah.
They're also surveying people that apply for the lottery, even if they don't get selected, they're trying to understand really what anglers value, like how they want to see things move forward. One of the projects that they're doing, maybe multiple of them, I'm getting them confused now, but there's going to be some people that if they're selected, when they go out and fish on one of these trips, they don't throw back anything until they hit their limits. And so it's basically like a no discard fishery.
Interesting.
So if the problem is discards, well, what happens if we stop discards, right?
Yeah.
So can we turn those discards into landed catch? How does that work?
Yeah.
And so I think that's really positive. They're just starting that now. The lottery system. So they're doing like a quarterly lottery.
Yep.
The first one closes this week, and then they're going to open them up subsequently throughout the next year. And so they'll have people fishing year round, essentially, in those quarters. And so hopefully they learn some things that can get picked up by other states or through the South Atlantic Council, and hopefully in a hurry because,
Yeah. People are getting frustrated.
It's ugly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I heard rumors too that they wanted people to potentially record their catch too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
I went out to Alaska a couple years ago, and that was a big thing. We
Isn't
had
it? Yeah.
I mean, the moment it landed too, we actually got boarded.
The log.
Yes.
Yeah.
We got-
it's very regimented for sure.
And I didn't know about this, and our guy, he knew about it, but we were totally fine. We didn't get a fine or nothing, but you have to record that as soon as that thing's
Yes.
caught. You have to
Soon
write
as
the
it-
time,
yep.
everything, and we didn't for a couple salmon, and yeah, that was we got really, and they were no joke.
Not so
like,
much, yeah.
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 If I could like, because there's like common threads here
Yeah.
that I want
Yeah.
to hit on. So like, if you
Data.
take a step back, I want to go like way back. So like, if you look globally,
Yep.
U.S. has by far the best managed fishery. Like, as much as we're sitting here bickering, like our fisheries are by far the best
For sure,
managed
100%.
of anywhere in. Like, we'll have, we're American Sportfishing Association,
Yep.
so we represent the nation's trade association. We'll have organizations from other countries come periodically and visit with, from Australia. We had folks from Japan. You would think Japan, fairly, rich,
Yeah.
first world country, they have zero fisheries data. We were asking them, like, well, how many anglers do you have? Well, we don't know. Well, how do you manage them? We don't have any licenses. Like, it's completely unregulated. And that's real. I mean, you look around the country, Australia, like half of their marine waters are in protected areas.
Yes.
Anyway, there's problems everywhere. So like, it at least puts in perspective, like maybe we don't have it as bad as we think, but part of the reason our fisheries are so well managed is we've got the funding for it. So
Yeah.
you've got, especially with states, I mentioned earlier the excise tax on fishing equipment. That money's
That's
all
something
going
I
back.
never knew about.
Yeah, so that, and I think 98% of anglers don't know it exists. Industry knows it exists because we're paying the tax, but and states know it exists because they're getting it and putting it to good use.
Yeah.
So between that, license dollars, that creates the funding for states to be able to go out, manage, stock fish, build boat ramps, do habitat restoration work, regulate these fisheries where we're providing access, but we're making sure that they're sustainable. Where that starts to break down is when you get in the ocean, especially when you get offshore in federal waters. For one, it's harder to measure those fish. The ocean's a big place. It's,
Weather.
Hard to count what you can't see.
Yeah, so it's inherently harder to measure the fish. You tend to have a little bit less money to do it, especially for recreationally important species. Historically, most of that money's gone to, you mentioned Alaska, to like commercially dominant regions and for commercially important fisheries, because historically that's who's yelled the most and demanded the most money to go to those. So recreational fisheries that are important to us have generally been an afterthought. But what's going on at that same time, while we haven't necessarily gotten the funding to know how many fish are out there, how many are we catching, these requirements have gone in that we have to manage all of our federally managed fisheries by annual catch limits. Each year we're going to know how many fish you're allowed to take. You can't go over your limit. If you go over the limit, there's going to be accountability measures. We're going to shut you down for next year, but we don't have the data to support any of that. So we're caught in this box of like, we've got this
That's a huge
extremely
gap
high
I've
bar,
talked about,
and that's
yeah.
the underlying problem with
Yeah.
all this.
It's-
There's this really high bar for how we're managing these, and we don't have the data to do it.
support it.
It's just the way it is. It's the law it's set, and we're going to stick with it.
Yeah, because it works for commercial fisheries because you've got the data to do that. They've proven that if you're not heavily regulating them, they're going to catch every last fish. So you need that level of heavy regulation on them. But it's been applied to the recreational sector too, and it's like something's got to give here. Either we
Yeah.
need more management flexibility or we need to put a lot more money towards data collection.
Yep.
Because right now there's this huge discrepancy, and that precaution, like we're seeing with red snapper and some of the other fisheries, leads to, well, we don't know how many fish you're catching, so we got to put these big buffers in to make sure you don't exceed this imaginary catch limit we came up with. So that means less fishing opportunities, and that's a lot of what creates
can
this
help
frustration.
us with the data collection? I mean, every state's obviously going to probably be different based on funding, right? It's not going to be federally.
Yeah.
So how involved are the colleges around the coastline? I mean, is that something that they consider doing?
So yeah, certainly on the like fishery independent, like how many fish are out in the water. Yeah, there's a combination of state, federal, academic work being done there. That's always going to come down to more money. What we focus a lot on is on the catch and harvest, effort and catch estimates of how many fish are anglers catching. We've got a number of fish. How do we measure how many we're catching to get there? There's a nationwide system called MRIP that NOAA manages, called Marine Recreational Information Program. It does pretty good for some fisheries that are broad ranges, highly encountered fisheries, because it's a survey, it's an estimate. For a lot of other fisheries, it does a horrible job because you're just not intercepting enough people to get accurate estimates. You talk to one person off of one dock who caught one of these fish, and you extrapolate that out times, however many million. Yeah, it's tough. So
And there's uncertainty there.
a lot of
Very
uncertainty.
uncertainty.
But
So what do you do? What do you do with that uncertainty? That's where the challenges really lie.
yeah, so how do you get that better data? So we've seen proven examples of, we talked red snapper in the South Atlantic. If you go back in time, red snapper in the Gulf of Mexico was the big tire fire that
That's
was
what I
blazing.
remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what fixed that was states have largely taken over management there. The 5 Gulf states have their own data collection programs. They get their own slice of the pie that they get to manage based on the nature of their own fisheries. Someone from Alabama Department of Natural Resources was with us yesterday. He was talking about how they've managed to stagger their fall red snapper schedule based on when Alabama football is playing and when their deer season opens versus when their
That sounds about right.
It points to like they know their fishermen, they know their state, and like what anglers want. So you can customize, your regulations and your fishing opportunities based on those more local needs than under some national federal program. So we've seen that model of states sort of taking the driver's seat and using their data collection, working with their anglers. And, it doesn't have to be for every single fishery. We don't need to, throw everything out. But where the current system's not working, something needs to fill in the blank. And in a lot of cases, that's going to be states taking more control over data collection, and just to start at least.
Yeah. I've always been, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to try and close the loop, getting back to where we started with flounder. Like, that's what I mean when in terms of, as Mike was explaining, we've got this catch limit. We have really uncertain data about where we are relative to that catch limit, but we act like we know that this is fact and truth. And so like he was saying, something has to give, right? Like, you're either adjusting the management system to deal with the uncertainty in that data, or you're improving the data to meet the stringent requirements of the catch limit. Yeah. So it can go either way. The more challenging pathway, I think, is improving the recreational catch data collection processes over time. We've shifted in my region to try and looking at, is there a way to tweak the management system to deal with the uncertainty in the data that we have right now? So those are just some ideas that we've come up with to address this mismatch that we have between the catch limits and the data that we have to meet those catch limits.
Sounds like a pain in the ass.
It is not easy.
Yeah.
I mean, all with the backdrop of federal legislation, and then the state, the states working with and then the stakeholders, it can get messy very quickly.
I feel like there's a lot of arguments too, like you're right, I'm wrong, or whatever. But
well, I mean, we infight within our community quite a bit too, which doesn't help. But so I work in DC, so I encounter a bunch of other associations, like completely outside of fisheries, and I'll say what I do, and people are always like, "Oh, fishing, that sounds awesome. I bet your job's so fun." Like, no, I don't go fishing all the time. And like fishing, fun, relaxing, enjoyable. Like fisheries policy is the complete
you guys do a lot.
opposite.
And I've like over the years since I started qualified captain coming to ICAST, I've been learning more and more and more how much you guys get involved with not just fishing, but I mean we can go into a lot of topics, and we will. But before we do, I had a random thought. I was thinking like, with the management of data, and let's say you focus on one fish like American red snapper, for example, and you're so protected, like, do you have an issue where they become like a predator control issue? Where that's
people's concern really with red snapper.
That's
now.
my concern.
So like, we have fishery independent data that Mike was talking about, basically stuff that scientists go collect, that they're collecting the data rather than using fisherman logbooks or anything like that. When they've done studies in the South Atlantic, red snapper are just shooting right up, steady as it goes. And then when they look at other things like groupers and other snapper species, like right at the same rate, kind of all around the same time. And so, I mean, that is people's concern, because they, just like what you're saying, they go and dive, or they put their camera down when they hit a spot, and it's like, okay, can we get through these red snapper to see like what else is here?
Yep.
So, I think it's still somewhat an open question to like what is actually happening. Is it like, are there environmental shifts? Red snapper are hungry too. If you've ever red snapper fished, you know that they are
absolutely
aggressive. They are probably one of the easiest reef fish to catch because they will bite on anything, right? And so that's definitely a question that people have, because at least looking at like diet studies of the adults, it doesn't seem to be that way.
Okay.
But
who knows though?
Right.
I mean, it's very hard to
study. There's something happening that we are not understanding clearly, because where did all these fish come from?
Yeah. And same thing, and this is a totally another topic that we can maybe talk about another day. I don't know, this is me. I've seen more sharks than I've ever seen before.
Yes.
And I know It's very controversial too, but same thing like out on land. You got to have some kind of predator control, right? I mean, there's coyotes everywhere. Why is there deer, population going down? That kind of thing. So I don't know. Sharks, like, do we want to dive into that? I mean, quick summary though. Like, how do you guys feel right now? How does the American Sportfishing Association, like, are you guys addressing anything yet? Has that been brought up?
Oh, sure.
Yes.
Yeah. No, we hear about shark depredation as much, if not more, than we hear about red snapper and everything else. I mean, people will fuss about, these tight restrictions, low bag limits, short seasons, and then compounded on that is, and when we do get to fish, the sharks are getting our fish before we get to bring them to the boat anyway. Yeah.
It's insane.
No, there's no question that shark numbers have gone up across the board. Now, that's not to say every single shark species is, there's still some individual shark species that are threatened or endangered. Those generally aren't the ones that are causing issues with depredation.
No.
So numbers have definitely gone up. There certainly seems to be some combination of more abundance and a learned behavior where, they hear that boat.
And their reproduction too. Some of them, like hammerheads, don't they reproduce like a stupid amount every time? I forget what species it is, but
yeah, I feel like I've heard that too. They're definitely doing really, really well, which is largely a success story. We've done a good job of bringing sharks back, but the consequence of that is they're everywhere. They're obviously eating a lot, and especially they're eating a lot of hooked fish before you can get them to the boat or to the shore. And there's no easy solution to all that. What we're focused on, there's a bill in Congress we've been working on called the Sharked Act. It's a long acronym I won't get into, but it would create a task force to at least get all the different layers of management to sit down and talk through ways to mitigate this problem. Because right now the challenge is you go to any state agency or regional fishery management counselor and they're all pointing fingers at someone else saying, yeah, that's not really our problem. You got to go talk to whoever else. So we need all layers of fisheries management to come together and recognize this is a problem. It's getting worse.
Well, it becomes heated because everybody thinks sharks are like, we're going to lose them all. I mean, I'm not saying that for every species, but like, I mean, we see sandbars and all these sharks all the time, very aggressive sharks, and forget the recreational fishermen that are losing their fish. Think about all the species that there could be just wiping out.
Yeah,
that we don't know
something.
about.
Yeah, they're eating something. Yeah,
they're everywhere.
But how dare anyone say a bad word about a shark? You can't say they're doing anything wrong. But in this case, like, this is a clear conflict. It's an issue. I got to think, all these sharks coming away with a mouthful of terminal tackle is not great for the sharks either. But I mean, I also worry too, you're creating this group of anglers who are conservationists who care about the marine environment that are starting to hate sharks because it's destroying their fishing opportunities. So
you got to have some kind of predator control.
Yeah, we need some balance when you figure out.
When you take away something, it's going to be, unfortunately, probably a battle that you're going to have to deal with for a long time. I don't know, but this isn't my background. But I don't know. Just from diving and seeing all the stuff and all the YouTube and the content I get from people having to apply tourniquets fast, and then I heard it's really bad in Australia. It's nuts, man.
Yeah, yep.
So
yeah, it's a tricky one.
That's a whole nother conversation, though. Like, can you open up anyways. And then, man, we're gonna switch it a little bit again too. We didn't really focus too much on the Northeast. Like, is there anything up there that's been changed recently? I know we could talk about the striped bass because a lot of people are pissed off at how small that slot is. What's going on up there? Is there anything up to date that?
Yeah, so another scenario where management has gotten more strict through time. We're in a rebuilding period for the striped bass population. The trajectory is good right now, the rebuilding trajectory. Remember, you got to keep all this with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I know.
I think it's better to talk in trajectories than it is to talk in absolutes, given all the uncertainty that we just discussed that's involved in this entire process. So we have an increasing trend for striped bass, but we know on the horizon, there's been poor recruitment out of the Chesapeake Bay, which is a major spawning area for striped bass. And that's been a good indicator of what the fishery will look like in the future, right? You can't have big adult striped bass without starting with a lot of babies.
100, yep.
And so we know those, what we call poor year classes that have been spawned over the last 5 years are coming down the road, meaning when those fish get large enough to be part of our fishery that we are catching, there's going to be fewer of them. And so the question becomes, like, what do we do in the meantime to plan for that?
Yep.
And so that coupled with very ambitious conservation goals, very ambitious. Like, we're trying to rebuild the striped bass population to a level that it's barely ever been to in the history of striped bass that we've been measuring. And so the question becomes like, how far are we willing to go from a management and policy side to meet those very ambitious conservation goals? And you can see the byproduct of that. We have a very narrow slot limit.
Very interesting.
And so where we're currently focused is, okay, where do we go from here, right? Because we want to avoid like the scenario like southern flounder and the scenario like red snapper. Like, we want to make sure that management is aware of these headwinds, but also allowing for access for anglers to go out and catch a fish. And so, like, how do we balance those values? How do we balance building back a population to a conservation level that we can all agree on, which we never likely will, with the fishing access, with the ability to go out and actually catch those fish? And what worries me, working on this specifically, is like, we'll go too far, meaning we'll actually tell people to stop fishing for striped bass, which I think would be where everyone loses.
Well, we also need to acknowledge and all that fishing, the only dial that fisheries managers have to turn is fishing pressure.
Yes,
with striped bass, there's a whole lot more going on with striped bass.
Success is all environmentally driven, meaning you can have a lower population of striped bass and still get a robust year class. The indicators for good year classes and environmentally driven.
Okay.
Temperature. It's really like water flow, because remember, these fish come into the rivers to spawn, so they're in a very confined, dynamic environment where the temperature can change really rapidly. As opposed to the ocean, where like you've got much more currents and tides and deeper water, where water temperature doesn't change as quickly, and so that's a big indicator for spawning success. And so it's like, the managers, as Mike was pointing out, have very limited levers to pull when it comes to controlling access, even though those levers aren't going to necessarily produce a strong year class of striped bass. That's driven by environmental conditions. So it's like, at what point, at what point do you, how far do you want to take it is really where we are in the striped bass conversation. And I think there's going to be some really hard decisions pretty soon, because we're going to be in a scenario where if you want to reach this goal, you basically have to tell people to stop fishing for striped bass.
How soon?
Well, there's going to be an assessment coming in October, and that will give us, again, like I was talking about on flounder, those assessments are really important for us to understand the status of the resource, and then they use that scientific information to craft the management. So that will be the next time step for when we'll know like what more needs to happen if we're going to reach this goal. I think at some point, a conversation about where are we really going with this fishery? Like, are we willing to accept a slightly lower conservation goal to still allow people to go fishing for striped bass? Or are we wanting to reach this conservation goal at the expense of telling people you can't even go and fish for them? And that is what's coming on striped bass.
Then you got to make that decision.
Yes. And not only, not where,
not you. No,
that's what I think. Well, the point is though, like there's so many, like Mike was saying, like we're a very diverse, large community, recreational fishing, like there's so much. We have 57 million anglers nationwide, and so there's a lot of different perspectives associated with all that. And so kind of navigating that is what we feel like our responsibility is, making sure we understand the needs of our community and really trying to craft policies that allow for all the different individuals within our community to be able to access the resources the way they want to.
Getting the word out.
And not picking winners and losers in that decision making.
It sounds to me though, and maybe, I don't know, correct me if I'm right or wrong, it sounds like the Northeast has got it pretty dialed, like at least I'm talking on the striper studies, like the data is being collected a little bit stronger than maybe like...
Comes down to money. And the history, and the history is there too. The Striped Bass Conservation Act, I think it was 1984, really kicked off the regional management for striped bass and some of those other nearshore species. Of course, Magnuson came before that, but the Striped Bass Conservation Act really acknowledged how important striped bass was and made it the case that we have better information to make informed decisions because of that recognition. And that's where, working with Congress is so important to make sure we have the money and the resources to drive all of this.
Yeah.
So that, and striped bass happens to be kind of like an early adopter of that model.
Like almost grandfathered in, been working. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a lot. That's a lot to take on. And I think it's just a matter of, raising awareness and trying to get more anglers to involved and make sure, hey, there's a reason why you're buying your fishing license every year or your sportsman, all that stuff. Yeah, man.
Yeah, I often I think about that a lot of like how, we're living and breathing this stuff every day. I mean, it's our jobs, but to get anglers to show up, participate, pay attention to this stuff is tough. And like at some level, I get it. Like, why do you go fishing? Like generally to get away from life's problems,
Exactly.
like relax, decompress, and like now this hobby that you use as your like way to
escape,
de-stress from the world. Hey, let's add a 500-page fishery management plan you need to read. You need to go attend this council meeting where a bunch of commercial fishermen are going to yell at you, and a bunch of fishery scientists are going to sit there and show a bunch of, it's inherently like complex stuff, and you're taking a hobby that people have and layering on this regulation and access challenges. And that's part of what separates us from the commercial fishing industry. Like that is their job. Like what the quota is going to be is directly correlated to what their revenue for the year is going to be. So like for them, they have to pay attention to this stuff and live and breathe and go to it every day. For recreational fishermen, like they care, and a lot of them care a whole lot, but they also care about a bunch of other stuff too. So carve out that much time to devote to these wonky, complicated policy issues,
it's tough, man. It's
tough.
I've caught myself doing the same thing. I had this one guy preaching to me, a big diver, and he's like, man, we're going to have something's going to come up here soon with gag. Like we got to be on it. And honestly, none of us really got involved. And for that exact reason, man, like, I love diving, and then you don't complain or say anything until that moment happens.
Oh yeah.
Like,
it's a lot of after the fact. Yeah.
Well, and it's hard to just like walk into one of these fisheries meetings
It's
if you
aggressive.
don't know the process, because it's intimidating and it's very complex. And so what you see on the water, which is helpful information. Do not get me wrong, it is very helpful. But like if you go and sit and listen to the meeting where they're discussing it, I mean, they're talking about alternatives A, B, C, D, E, E, G. Like there's all these different options that fit the federal system or the state system or whatever. And it's not intuitive.
Yeah.
And like the feedback that the managers may be looking for, you explaining what you see on the water isn't necessarily, that's helpful, but it doesn't necessarily help them solve pick which decision. And so one thing that can be really powerful that we can do as ASA is when it is like a code 5, like fire alarm, like super huge deal, because we are working for the recreational fishing industry, when we can call those people to the table and remind the managers like, okay, yes, this is a hobby and yes, it is anglers, but there are all these businesses behind this that frankly get forgotten about a lot of the time.
Yeah. You made a good point. I never thought about that.
Yeah. So like,
that's why we're there.
Yeah. So like
that's why we're here.
We'll talk about
that's why we're here. Yeah, that's why we're here.
We'll talk about the federal process, but like they're supposed to, as they're going through it, look at economic impacts of different decisions. And at least in my region, that stops at least for recreational, like they'll maybe try to estimate like how does it affect charter boat revenue?
Yeah.
Okay, but look at what's happening on the show floor here. This is a huge industry. There's tackle shops, there's marinas, there's manufacturers, there's
boat dealers even.
I mean, yes. Like
we were talking about that on the way up here. We're talking about different trade shows, and this is the only one we go to. And we're like, because we consider going to Surf Expo and all that, but we're thinking like, who do you know that hasn't threw out a fishing line and caught a fish? Like everybody I know, like all my friends, everybody growing up, fished one way or another, or grew up fishing with grandpa. So it is a huge hobby, and it's something that you gotta like keep up with. And I never thought about that with the business side of things. You made a really good point.
And if you think the data are bad on kind of how many fish are being caught. It's even worse on what is the economic impact, or like how does economics factor into decision?
Yeah.
The decision makers rely a lot on stakeholder input to balance those questions. And so that's where it's really helpful to have, we contract with an individual to help us understand what's the value of our fishing industry, what's the value of some of these fisheries, so that we can use that information to help the managers understand the consequences of some of their decisions from an economic standpoint.
Yeah. It's important. I mean, that's why we're here, like you said.
Yeah.
The biggest topic we had to bring up, and we gotta discuss it, is the speed restriction. Like, where are we at with that? Because a lot of people keep telling me like it ain't ever gonna happen, and if it does, how are they gonna enforce it, and all that stuff. If they do it, like, screw them. They can't keep up with us. Like, that's a lot of our followers are gonna ask that question, like, and they're gonna want to know, like, where are we at with this? Is it gonna happen? Why is it even gonna happen? All that good stuff. Like, and where is the spot we have to worry about the most? Because I've always been told, like, the Northeast is having all these issues this year with the whales that are washing up. I don't know if these numbers have been consistent throughout the past couple decades, or is it drastically?
It's a lot higher.
Because I've seen arguments that, well, they're like, well, if you really look at the data, it's been happening for years. But
there's certainly, well, I don't want to get too far into this topic, but there certainly seems to be a correlation between the amount of offshore wind activity taking place.
Just so happened
Mid-Atlantic, and now suddenly a ton of whales are washing up on shore. So, yeah, well, Mike's been really deep in the weeds on the right whale vessel speed, especially on the technical side of it, which has been a huge part of it. As we saw this rule come about, of like every boat above 35 feet has to go 10 knots or less because of 5 whales that have been struck over the last 15 years. Like, something doesn't sound right.
You called me, or somebody called me right away, like, yo, can you help us out here with this? Like, we got, like,
this can't be right. So anyway, we've done a lot of digging into it and found, sure enough, this was a severely flawed analysis that led to this rule. But yeah, so the rule came out 2 summers ago.
Yep, I remember.
It has not gone into effect. The latest estimate we're getting is November, possibly, that it'll come out. But that previously was last summer, then it was last fall, then it was this spring, and now it's this November.
Is this just the Northeast?
It is from Massachusetts down to Central Florida.
Okay.
So it's all one big blob.
And what about the Gulf?
No, there's a separate issue in the Gulf of Mexico with a different whale called the Rice's whale.
Yeah.
That's not in any rulemaking stage just yet. It probably will be before long, but I mean, we're at the doorstep on this North Atlantic right whale.
So we're focusing on this.
Yeah. But I mean, there are implications, because if and when this becomes the de facto approach that the federal government takes of, well, let's just shut the ocean down because
pretty much
we can't let a single vessel ever come near a whale, then okay.
The impact it would have.
Oh,
would
it's
be
well. So we were talking about the economic. I mean, we've heard from boat dealers
Right.
who are already losing customers because people are like, why am I going to buy this boat if there's a chance
No
I can't use
way.
it for half the year? So the impact's already happened, and the rule hasn't even gone into effect yet. So imagine when it does go into effect,
whether you fish or not.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So and
Right.
I mean, we did an estimate of how much. So again, 5 whales since 2008 to 2022, when the rule was first proposed. 5 right whales were struck by vessels in this size class, 35 to 65 feet. We estimated there were over 5 million just recreational fishing trips that took place in this area over that time frame, not including all of the non-recreational fishing trips. And so that, if you do the maths, less than a 1 in a million chance of any of those boats hitting a whale. And yet we're trying to regulate the entire Atlantic Ocean based off of a less than a 1 in a million probability of something happening. Surely there's got to be a better way to go about this.
If you hit a whale in if I have a 33-foot center console, you would freaking feel it. Like,
you would generally know
so
about it.
Are these people that have been proven to hit it, like, they're like, I reported like, hey guys, I just smoked a whale. My lower unit's like completely shot. Have these been
it's hard to hide. Yeah, I mean, there was an example of St. Augustine a few years ago, and
that
I mean,
poor,
the boat.
that poor boat. Every article about this. Yeah, I mean, they were coming back into port, I think.
They were like a mile off.
Yeah, and they hit a whale. The boat sunk, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they barely made it back short and eventually sunk. Yeah.
I mean, it's like
it's
hitting a
devastating.
school bus, right? Like, there's
But no one wants to do
If
this.
it was
that's
a
for sure.
serious issue, though, people would be like, oh, I mean, every time we go out, we're like, oh, where's the log? We don't want to.
Yeah. Well, that's it. It's like, as a vessel operator, you're always looking out for obstructions.
Always.
Right? And avoiding them, because that's
Scares
a safety
the
tactic.
shit out of me, dude.
Right, exactly, exactly. So yeah, that's some of the arguments we've been making, is that the vessels have technology on them that can help avoid obstacles, whether it's a whale or a logger, and can we really increase the speed at which those technologies are implemented on the water to help identify, locate, and really
idea.
Broadcast where whales are sighted, so that we're not taking this really broad brush blanket approach that's going to have this huge economic impact for a really rare chance of hitting a whale. Instead, can we use different technologies to identify where the whales are and have more dynamic management?
There's so many layers to this. Like, as you were saying, you've heard from folks who say, well, they're not going to be able to do anything about it anyway. Like, that's a good question. How the heck are they going to enforce this? Like right now, 35 or 65 foot and up vessels, have an AIS requirement that's used to monitor whether they've exceeded these speed limits, which are currently in much smaller areas. You don't have to have an AIS if you're under 65 feet. So that's not going to be a tool to do it. How are you going to have law enforcement out there with radar guns on the high sea? It's just, from a practical standpoint, like, even if this rule had the potential to really do anything to save whales, there's enforcement. It's just not a viable option.
It just doesn't make sense to me. When I heard it, I thought it was fake.
Yeah.
And I know, seriously, somebody had a radar gun sticking outside their console, and I was like,
oh, that's what the Coast Guard wants to do now, is go write speeding tickets for every vessel out there.
Here's the technology side. It's like using all this electronic equipment. That's the way to go. Like, okay, fine. If you want to do this, why don't we use our technology to study this and prevent it? Like, for example, they tag all these sharks, these white sharks, all this. Like, I'm not saying tag a whale. Maybe you can, maybe, I don't know. I'm not, but if they can do that, there's got to be a way we can study.
I keep saying, if we can tag bumblebees, then surely there's a way.
If we can study a mammal that comes to the surface all the time. You know what I'm saying?
And again, whether it's we've heard it's hard to tag these things. Regardless, there is so much technology out there between heat sensing, all the underwater acoustics, sound. There's
Garmin's got some crazy stuff now. They've got their radar picks up birds. And I think they've got new stuff coming out too in the future.
Oh, I mean, the more we talked about this, we've heard folks in like the marine electronics industry like, yeah, we can do that
easy.
We can do that easily.
Yeah, just like help give us some time to figure this out
and that's scale it up and get it on the boats and all that stuff. But like NOAA's response is like, no, we're just going to regulate our way out of this.
So, okay, we got that going on, and it's freaking everybody out. Is this something seriously though that we like? You guys see it maybe happening?
Oh, yeah. I'm confident that at some point they're going to come out.
Crazy.
Now, happening meaning the rule will get finalized. Whether it ever goes into effect is a different story, because Congress has been paying a lot of attention to this. There are several bills that have been introduced, bipartisan supported bills in opposition to this, that essentially say, hey, let's pump the brakes on this and let's focus on technology and actual solutions.
As a long-term, clear solution.
And in the meantime, let's not shut down, because we're talking about fishing and boating here. There are a lot of other entities that are freaking out about this. The ports, the pilots, think of what this is going to do to the efficiency of our ports. Ferry operators, Mike's from Nantucket. Nantucket's freaking out right now.
Yeah, because they run high-speed ferries between the Cape and islands.
They rip.
Yeah, they rip, dude. Those things, even in like a 5-6 foot sea, they rip.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that would be hugely impactful. So, Mike's point is this: there's a lot of other industries and communities that are being impacted by this rule.
You forget the
and I feel like we were pretty early in terms of advocates, and now I feel like we're seeing more and more people, given the different outreach.
Oh my gosh, this is terrible.
Like picking up on the things you guys have done, picking up on the work we've done. Like more and more people are learning more about it and getting more engaged, which is what we want, right?
So like this is right up our alley, because I mean, we cover not just fishing, everything. And I had a couple commercial guys go out to me that do a lot of survey work not just for the windmills, but a lot of just, dredging projects and all that. They're like, we couldn't do our job.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if we did, it would cost us double the amount, because it would take time.
So that's what I think. Like, let's not shut all this stuff down, because I mean, once you shut this stuff down, it's not easily quickly coming back.
No.
Say 6 years from now, suddenly NOAA wakes up and says, oh yeah, actually let's focus on technology and reduce these the size of these speed zones.
It's just not worth.
Yeah, let's figure that stuff out. I don't know. I mean, the analogy, I find it fascinating that the environmental groups are using this. They keep saying, this is like school zones. People are fine with school zones. We just need school zones for these whales. And my response is like, yeah, but you know where school zones are? They're around schools.
Yeah.
You don't take the entire country and turn it into a school zone between 2:30 and 3:30 in the afternoon. Let's figure out where these whales are. If we need to slow down when we're near the whales, let's do that. But you don't need to shut down the entire Atlantic Ocean in the meantime to do that.
No, and we have the technology to do it, and it'll happen. I really hope we get the technology to prove it. Then they really can't argue with us anymore at some point.
Yeah.
This is so controversial. I gotta bring it up, and I'm not trying to start a conspiracy, but is anything to do, in your guys' opinion, with the windmills have an effect on these whales that are washing up on the beach? It's just kind of ironic that it's just happening. I mean, I don't know. My buddies do a lot of survey work, and some of them, I don't think they know. Some of them say it doesn't have any issues at all. Some swear it definitely does.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't.
Well, NOAA has said there's no link, but that doesn't mean that a link isn't there.
Yeah.
The
Correlation, causation.
Yeah, there's I mean,
It's sad.
they just don't, frankly, I think they don't know. There's no direct link that's been identified, but clearly there's a pattern that's occurring.
Bottlenose dolphin too. I'm pretty
And
sure.
so I think before the agency takes such a conclusion like that, I think they should admit, like, we don't really know whether it's having an impact or not. There are clearly whales washing up on the beach at the same time that a lot of survey activity is going on for offshore wind energy. And so is there a relationship there? The information that they have says that there isn't, but could it be further studied and better resolved? I think that's really where they should put some of their focus.
Put some of their money
rather than just dismissing it as, oh, right now there's no causal link. So, that's not the reason. They should study it more, frankly.
Because who knows, when they start working their way down the south, okay, what species is it going to have an effect on now, if there is any at all? But it could be a domino effect. Because I know they want to do it off the Carolinas.
There's a lot of offshore wind energy coming around the U.S.
in very short order.
Yeah.
The map is...
Like, if you're tracking this topic, they are announcing very frequently new call areas, new leases being procured. And it's happening at such a speed. We were in a wind panel earlier, and we have a position on offshore wind, and in development of that position, I was doing some research, and I came across a Department of Energy report that was predicting by 2050, there will be 10,000 wind turbines in U.S. waters by 2050.
Jesus.
Right now we have a dozen up off of New England, give or take. They're starting build out of some of those projects right now.
And they still haven't really seen much results.
Yeah, so they don't. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns associated with that, and the speed at which it's happening really precludes the ability to understand all the impacts.
A lot of windmills in that fast.
That's a lot, but 10,000 by 2050. Think about that. That's a lot of structure that's about to go into the water.
And a lot of, yeah, man. I mean,
I don't think it's conspiratorial, though, to at least ask
the
these questions.
Okay, yeah.
But I mean, I also, there's a lot of money wrapped up in investments in offshore wind happening. You've got an administration that has made it very clear we want this to happen.
A lot of states.
Is there any investment, though,
clear
on them studying this question? Is doing this work out on our waters affecting this whale population, or the deaths of all these whales? Like, are they investing in any of that to study that?
Oh, man.
Or is it even like, oh, nope, that's not an issue?
No, it's such a valid question. And then, so take the right whale, the North Atlantic right whale topic that we just talked about, right? And we want to see a huge amount of resources put towards that conservation challenge. And so it's like, there's not enough money to go around for all of this.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of like prioritizing where the money is spent. And so I think that is a very important question. And I'm not sure exactly whether the agency is putting resources towards that question, but we are pushing the agency to put resources towards the North Atlantic right whale vessel speed rule and the technology advancements. So, it can be tricky to be like, spend money here and here and here, and it's a limited amount of
if you're
pot
going to
begin
drop
with.
10,000 windmills in 25 years, you
Yeah.
better
And-
maybe do some research.
And it's a different agency too. Like Bureau of Ocean Energy Management is the one that's responsible for all the offshore wind energy, and that's separate from NOAA Fisheries, which is handling the right whale speed rule stuff. So we have been encouraging BOEM to be putting forward money. But again, all that has to be appropriated through Congress, et cetera. So
But it is a fair question you're essentially
yeah.
asking of, are we saying there's no relationship because we haven't studied it? Or
no.
are we saying there's no relationship because we've studied it and
Well, hear
determined
me out.
conclusively there's no...
yeah, the limited information they have, they claim there's no relationship.
Like, what if it affected a different species down that they might not have, like all of a sudden, like, I don't know, I'm trying to just think of something random down south that has a totally different reaction. If there is even a reaction at all to, I'm assuming surveying work. I don't want to make the assumption, but I don't know any other, what else.
Transmission lines. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions.
Pile driving of foundations. Like there's
a couple of my buddies that do commercial scallop fishing up there. They're pissed because it's just so happened to be some on one of their most, important scallop grounds, that they've been fishing for God only knows since it started.
Yeah.
I got a Barnegat Light. I got a bunch of friends up there, and they're you go up to New Jersey, they are pissed.
Yeah, that's where a lot of that's where a lot of
that's where I'm from.
That's where a lot of the strandings and whale deaths have occurred right in that area.
New Jersey, New York, but mostly Jersey.
I mean, the potential upside of all this that we, there's a lot of calculation to make here, but I mean, anyone that's fishing the Gulf of Mexico, the oil platforms, I mean, they're fishing meccas. I mean, it's just this huge structure, holds a lot of fish, creates this, entire ecosystem. So to what extent would we see that on some of these wind turbines? Would we have access to them? Could you fish up near them? These are all from an access standpoint.
I don't know if I would want to, at least dive by it. I was thinking about that. I don't know.
Can you? Would you want to? I don't know. These are questions. But
if that 24-pounder was out there, you'd probably be diving on it.
Think about it. It's producing electricity. There's
a lot of
too much data. I don't know, how the windmills work. I don't.
Yeah, from a safety standpoint.
But,
we don't know.
Yeah, man. I don't know. There's just a lot going on.
Yeah.
I didn't know that many.
Yeah, I mean, just to put a plug, that's why we're engaged in all these because there's so much happening.
You guys do a lot.
And so
we're not even really focusing on the freshwater side.
We haven't talked freshwater. We haven't talked West Coast. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty going on everywhere.
Maybe we can do another one.
You were saying earlier that the Mid-Atlantic's most
we'll get the reaction, the feedback from this, and we'll do another one.
You were saying Mid-Atlantic's the most controversial. I was like, I don't know, where is the most controversial? Everywhere's got controversy
for sure.
Pacific with the crab fisheries too. I know
salmon in the Northwest. I mean, man, it gets complicated and controversial real quick. So,
well, guys, I think we covered a pretty good amount.
Enough.
Yeah.
Let's stop here and let's do it again though. I would like to maybe follow back up in a little bit after we get some more information, and I'd be happy to come. We come back down here. You guys come up by us. You're right, and
I'm in Moorhead. Yeah,
dude, we can get together again.
Yeah, for
Let's
sure.
definitely keep in touch because this, it's. I just did it exactly what you explained. It's we treat this as a hobby, and I kind of forget about it until it happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I need as our brand and our reach, we got to get more involved. So, whatever we can do to kind of get the memo out, we'll help you guys out.
Well, I appreciate you being willing to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got a lot of folks here. Everyone cares about this, but getting people to take that next step of learning about it themselves and then educating their customers, their followers about it. I mean, that takes effort. And so I appreciate
not getting
you being willing to do it.
frustrated and giving up.
Yeah, it's just too complicated.
And you're very transparent and going, not just jumping to conclusions. You're working your ass off trying to figure it out the right way so everybody's happy, and that's I think the most important thing.
Yeah.
So
it's a balancing act.
Well, cool guys.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you guys.
Appreciate it. Yeah.